So, Danny Brown, Atrocity Exhibition, 2016. To me, this is the defining rap album of the previous decade. And I think there's a few reasons for that. Number one, to me, this is the most defining album when it comes to the entire wave of experimental, industrial, noise rap, whatever you want to call it, trend that we saw all throughout this decade. Talking about guys like JPEG Mafia and Clipping and Death Grips and even more into abstract hip hop if you're talking about Earl, even though that's a whole different lane. It seemed like experimental rap throughout this decade really stood out for having a culture of just being completely unique. And even though all those albums go down under the umbrella of experimental rap, they all sound different. And that's just because when you're making experimental music, you're trying to make the most unique sound. And out of all of those albums, to me, Atrocity Exhibition is the most unique and defining. Second reason, I think this is a very well-balanced album when it comes to the entire underground and mainstream style of rapping that we saw throughout this decade. When it comes to defining albums for an entire decade, it may be a little bit hard choosing between mainstream and underground albums, as mainstream albums may outshine those underground albums. But to me, this album has the perfect cohesiveness of intertwining both of those styles of mainstream and underground rap into one album that it perfectly defined an entire era of rap for both sides. But I'll get into that a little bit as the video goes on. And third, of course, quality. This all wouldn't really mean that much without quality, and Atrocity Exhibition to me is up there in terms of quality with your Tippin' Butterflies and your My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasies and Run the Jewels 2 and all those defining great rap albums of the decade. I think it's up there with all of them. So we start off with Downward Spiral, and this literally sounds like the closest rap has gotten to post-rock or even noise rock. Once that beat drops, once Danny's hook comes in, it literally sounds like something Slint would have used early in the 90s for one of their albums. This really taps into the uniqueness of Atrocity Exhibition. And despite there being other records that were really unique that we can put Atrocity Exhibition next to, they don't seem to just define an entire subgenre that hip-hop doesn't even really seem to be getting into yet, as much as Atrocity Exhibition does. Like, this literally at times doesn't even feel fully like a rap album at times. We then get Tell Me What I Don't Know, and here's where we get Danny's more human-like flow, as I like to call it, which we're used to. He uses this flow in his more serious toned tracks, and this is usually where Danny reflects on his past struggles towards the listener. And in here, he feels like his whole life is just revolving around drugs, and this is really one of the themes that sets up the album. But we don't usually get these type of tracks this early in the track list. To me, this is such a defining album for Danny because we know that drugs have always been a huge part of his life and the way he makes music, but they've never seemed to reach this level of a problem for him as much as it did for Atrocity Exhibition. I think the fact that he addresses something this early really shows you in how much of a struggle Danny was in when making this record. And I think this is the reason why Atrocity Exhibition stands out compared to even Danny's craziest early work. And it's because even when Danny's doing his fun type of banger tracks throughout this record, you can hear the pain that Danny feels deep inside him. Even when he's in this state of drug use where you're supposed to be having fun and enjoying yourself, there are certain lines just hidden in there that it just shows like Danny's just screaming in pain deep inside himself. And I think Tell Me What I Don't Know is just a good basis to just start off this entire record in terms of subject matter. And when it comes to these banger type tracks, Ain't It Funny is a perfect description of this. And here Danny's talking about partying with women and having a great time and doing all these drugs, but at the same time you kind of hear Danny losing grasp with himself. Despite this being such a banger and fun track, you hear the line, I might need rehab, but to me that shit pussy. Like, you can have a really fun time listening to this record, but when you break it down, you sort of really hear Danny just screaming for help. And that's what this gives the banger type tracks so much depth, that like they're just not just fun banger type tracks that you can just consume. They really have a lot of meaning layered in each of them. And this continues in tracks like Gold Dust, Dance in the Water, Pneumonia, and even in When It Rained. And these tracks, even though Danny brings a lot of energy and talks about partying, having fun, it doesn't really seem like Danny's having any fun at all, really. Gold Dust is probably one of the most evident when it comes to this. The hard-hitting drums all throughout this thing, and Danny comes in with this high-pitched voice, and that's usually the combo that we're used to when it comes to Danny just wanting to blow off some steam and just have some fun in the mic. But even with all the fun energy, he says, numbing up with drugs to suppress these feelings, and in the very next bar, he says, what's the recipe for a good time? A whole lot of liquor while you're doing coke lines. And this just seems like proof that Danny's just really lost within himself, and even though he's doing all of this, deep down he knows that he shouldn't be taking part in this if he really cared about his health. Now the next few tracks 4 and 5, I think perfectly describe the entire way that when it comes to Danny rapping, he can intertwine so many different styles. And this is where I think he incorporates sonically very cohesive sounds that mesh with both both the underground and the mainstream. First, we come off with Really Doe, which is a Black Milk beat, and this is probably the simplest and most looped out beat throughout this entire thing. And it contains a Kendrick feature, and Kendrick has most of the load here as he handles the hook and the verses. And I think this is a very good way of bringing in the listener. I really feel like this is the type of track that I can play in front of all of my friends that might not be that much even into hip hop, because the Kendrick feature really does work here, and the hook sounds very catchy, simple, along with the beat, even though it still bangs. It sort of brings an edge to Danny Brown's music, the fact that he can do this and not subtract anything when it comes to quality. And you hear all of that throughout the track. I mean, the way Danny finishes his verse, like, you can tell he's done with that. Like, he performed the fuck out of that in the booth. Like, you can hear it just in the way he spits. He was flowing his ass off. His delivery was incredible. And despite of how good it is, I still think Earl outdid everyone in the end, which is crazy just based on how fucking dirty Danny's verse is. But really just a really interesting track that features like 4 of the heavyweights of rap. And I think it really brings an edge to this album. The fact that you can literally have one of the most experimental rap records out this decade, and even ever, at least in my opinion, and still have the biggest rapper in the world in your album, I really think it's a testament to something. And then in the very next track, Lost, Danny does the complete opposite of the previous track. Instead of having a simple beat, easily looped out, and having the most popular rapper in the world on your track, you take all of that out, take all of the snares, all of the drums, have a simple sample of a voice be like half of the beat along with some horns, and that's literally it, and just rap your ass off. This is something that has been throughout the underground all decade. From Rock Marciano to Ka, these guys would just take away the snares and the drums and just expand on their flows. I've talked about this so much, but the fact that Danny added this to his arsenal just shows how much depth he has as a rapper. I understand not being able to like him because of his voice and his delivery, and it doesn't sound that easy on the ears at first, but I really think you have to respect what Danny Brown can do and how much depth he has as an artist, not just as an MC. Rolling Stone, easily one of my favorite beats, such a groovy bass line added on with all these icy, cold light keys. I think it's just a very interesting beat. Has one of my favorite lines when he says, "Some people say I think too much, I don't think they think enough." I really feel like Danny Brown really stepped up to the subject matter in this one, even though his subject matter has always been very interesting, and here I feel like it's the most serious he's gotten. And even though literally like half the album is him just having fun, I think his subject matter here just reached a whole new level, in my opinion. White Lines is just another one of those tracks that surprised me. This contains an Alchemist beat, and Alchemist has just been someone that has worked with pretty much every underground MC that means something throughout this entire decade. And at first I didn't even know this was an Alchemist beat. Even though I love the Alchemist, I would say that his beat making is pretty simple, and that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, but it really surprised me that an Alchemist beat could make it to this album, an album that we know is just so expanding when it comes to sound. And I think it's very interesting to have one of the most important producers from the underground being such an album that expands on sound so much. I feel like at times people just narrow down underground rap to just boom bap, but this is just a testament to show how far those boom bap beats can really go. And we also have the track From the Ground, and again showing the testament when it comes to Danny Brown's range. He can also do R&B joints. The amount of different lanes that Danny Brown seems to fill with just one album is incredible, and those are the kind of things that have been the zeitgeist when it comes to this lane of rap. Like, every time Death Grips dropped an album, it had to be completely different. When JPEG drops an album, it has to be completely different from anything anyone else is doing, because that is the lane that you are fulfilling, and that is a testament of industrial and experimental rap music this decade. And I don't think even those guys could reach a level of depth that included R&B joints in such an industrial and experimental rap album like Atrocity Exhibition. And he doesn't miss a beat in quality. It's wild how Danny can be so grimy and gritty on the mic and still have very smooth R&B joints in the background and still complement his sound so fucking well. It really just shows how well thought out of an album this is, and that to me it really is Danny's magnum opus. Now, Get High is the only low moment in the album for me. I think initially when I first heard this record, and I didn't really like it all the way through as much as I do now, Get High was that one joint that I could kind of, come back to because it was so simple. It was probably the easiest one on the ears. But now, once I've been able to digest the album, hasn't really aged too well. But that's literally the only gripe that I have with this album. Besides that, it's a damn near perfect record, and when it comes to how unique it is, how defining it is in both the mainstream and the underground with its sound, with how quintessential and important it is to one of the most important subgenres this decade, and when you mix in the quality of this album, all of those things together, I don't think you can get a more defining rap album than Atrocity Exhibition. Now, those are my thoughts when it comes to just this record and how I feel about it. Another thing that I wanted to talk about was this whole notion that I feel like a lot of Danny fans fans have that is that they want a second part of this. This is very clearly his best album, even though I do think you can say Triple X is his best, but I feel like the consensus amongst Danny fans is that it is his best album. So a lot of people feel like, why doesn't he just do a second one of these? Why doesn't he just do something where he can expand on this sound? And quote unquote an Atrocity Exhibition 2, which is something that happens with pretty much every artist. The fans definitely want a sort of rendition of their best work, but I don't think it makes a lot of sense here. Like I said, expand on the sound. Can you really expand on this? I think this is about as deep and as far as this sound can go. And I think it makes total sense why Danny completely switched his style when it came to his following record, You Know What I'm Saying. Some albums feel like they can be expanded on, built upon, because their sounds don't reach a certain depth. But like I've been saying throughout this entire video, there is so much depth to this album that I don't think you can expand on it. At this point, we should just let Danny Brown continue to grow as an artist. And secondly, if you just listen to the subject matter of this album, it doesn't sound like Danny Brown had 1 ounce of fun making this. It sounded like a treacherous experience. If you read up on the entire process, he lost like $75,000 just in samples alone. It was a very expensive record to make. He wasn't very much pleased with how it sold as well. So overall, the entire process, like before, during, and after, didn't seem too happy for Danny Brown. So as a fan, I wouldn't want him to make this record again because I care about his health. I genuinely care that Danny is in a good state of mind, and I am pleased with this work. I don't need another one of these just because this one is about as good as it can get. I don't think he needs or even can expand on this sound. But yeah, those are my thoughts on it. Let me know what you think. What do you think is a defining rap album of the last decade? Do you agree? Do you not agree with my pick? Let me know. Please like, please subscribe, please share, and I'll be with y'all very soon. All right? Peace.